everyone. Welcome to Avaya University and our Overcoming Chronic Pain curriculum. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are co-mentors and co-owners of Avaya. Thank you so much for joining us. In this next class, we are talking with fellow teacher Dr. Peter Osborne. Dr. Osborne is the clinical director of Origins Healthcare in Sugar Land, Texas. He is world-renowned in the field of gluten and grain sensitivity, which is what we're going to be talking about, and one of the most sought-after functional medicine doctors in the country. And Dr. Osborne will be talking with us about no grain, no pain. So some of the key things you're going to learn about are, you're going to learn about grain. You're going to learn about what grain is and how grains are actually the seeds of grass. And you're going to learn about how it's not just gluten. So you may have heard all sorts of different information about how gluten can cause inflammation and can eventually lead to things like chronic pain or autoimmune diseases. And we're also going to talk about just grain as a whole. So not just gluten. Problems with grain include farming practices, different kinds of pesticides that are put on crops that are known carcinogens and can ultimately lead to more inflammation in your body and lead to things like chronic pain. He also talks about how grain is stored and how that can be a problem. Is it's stored in silos, which is doused with even more chemicals to prevent things like mold and critters getting in there. And then he also talks about the ratio of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3 fatty acids. And in grains, he says it can be around 12 to 1 or higher, which ultimately that ratio, having too much 6 and too little 3, leads to chronic inflammation, which can again lead to things like chronic pain. So in his book, he talks a lot about his 30-day plan. So he lays out a 30-day plan for eating. And obviously you might be wondering, what in the world do you get to eat if you're not eating any grain? No gluten, no grain. And he talks about all the many, many different varieties of food that you are maybe not aware of. He talks about, things like sweet potatoes, actually one of my very favorite foods, and how there's 5 different varieties of sweet potatoes. Talks about different meats, vegetables, nuts, fruits, all sorts of different things that you can incorporate in your diet that you might not be incorporating now. And then he ends with 7 things you should be thinking about on a daily basis, which I really love. A very holistic approach to your health and wellness, as well as it relates to your chronic pain and overcoming it. And now for our class with fellow teacher, Dr. Peter Osborne. Thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Osborne.
No, you're welcome, Andy. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure also. And I'm so excited to talk about this particular topic. Obviously, we have a lot of people tuning in right now who are suffering from some kind of chronic pain, whether it be autoimmune pain or something else. But how do grain and pain connect, I guess? Could you help us understand what the deal is with grain and pain?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a big question because it's not one thing. Most people think about grain, and what they're really thinking about is they're thinking about gluten. When I wrote No Grain, No Pain, I didn't write no gluten, no pain on purpose. Because a lot of people are gluten sensitive, but a lot of people are not gluten sensitive as well. And so there is, just a plethora of research. And in my clinic, I see it all the time where people have chronic autoimmune problems like rheumatoid arthritis, dermatomyositis, lupus, scleroderma, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis, like all of your autoimmune pain conditions, right, that affect the muscles, the joints, the bones, etc. And they have it because of a gluten sensitivity issue. Gluten sensitivity is one of those side effects of gluten sensitivity is that if you eat gluten, it can create an autoimmune problem. And for many people, that problem is autoimmune pain. But pain goes even deeper than physical pain. So when we talk about muscle pain, when we talk about joint pain, yes, that's pain. You're absolutely right. But there's hormone pain. What is hormone pain? Hypothyroid disease. Also can be autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's. Can be caused as a result of gluten sensitivity as well. So there's also diseases like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is an autoimmune type of diabetes of the ovaries, which can create pain and can create abnormal menstrual cycles and you name it. So these are painful conditions that people don't typically classify and put into the pain category, right? But they do cause pain. And a lot of times the pain is misdiagnosed. So let's take a woman, for example, who's got a low thyroid, and she's also got muscle pain and joint pain. Well, she's got muscle pain and joint pain because her thyroid's not working adequately to drive her metabolism for her joints and muscles and bones to heal and repair and maintain themselves. So she tries to implement exercise, her body breaks down, and it creates pain. But she's now being told that she needs to go through physical therapy, but her pain really doesn't have anything to do with physical therapy need. It has to do with the biochemical origin of gluten inducing an autoimmune disease. It's damaging her thyroid and her capacity to make thyroid hormone that then is subsequently leading to an inability for her body's, her muscle, her joints, and her bones to repair on a regular basis. So she develops pain as a secondary side effect, right, of the hormonal cascade of a gluten reaction. And so that's just gluten. So we're just talking about gluten sensitivity. The notorious aspect of gluten is that it can create and contribute to autoimmune processes that can manifest as painful diseases or manifest as other hormonal types of diseases that have secondary side effects of pain that can tend to get misdiagnosed. So kind of anybody who's watching right now can take a tidbit from this. Like, don't just classify, don't in your minds, if you're watching this thinking, well, I don't have pain. Look, if you've got a hormone problem, if you've got an adrenal problem, if you've got a problem with blood sugar regulation, if you are gaining weight and you don't know why, like, these are all pain points. So when you hear me talk about pain, and we're talking about pain as a general rule of thumb, we're talking about the pain of dysfunction. And sometimes that's physical pain, and sometimes that's the emotional pain involved with why is my body breaking down, and sometimes that's hormonal pain that's leading to secondary or tertiary side effects.
Got it.
So that's gluten, right? But your question was, let's talk about grain and pain. So what are some of the other aspects or components of grain that can contribute to pain? There are a lot of them. One of the problems with today's grain, as we make it, as we produce it, is the way that it's farmed. So if you look at common farming practices just for wheat alone, wheat and corn are two of the common ones. Wheat is not genetically modified. That's a misconception. A lot of people say, oh, it's the genetic manipulation of wheat. No, wheat has not been GMO'd. We've hybridized wheat. We've altered and changed it and manipulated it through selecting certain strains and combining certain strains to be hardier during winter or to grow and be more insect resistant or more drought resistant, etc. But we haven't genetically modified wheat. But we do use a lot of glyphosate or Roundup on wheat crops because it acts as a desiccant. It dries out the crop for harvest. And so it allows farmers to harvest more readily and get to the combining. I don't know if there's any farmers in the audience, but get to the combining of the wheat much quicker, which gets the work done faster. So when you spray food with poison and then you serve that up, expect that some people are going to get sick. So glyphosate, when wheat crops today are double sprayed with glyphosate as part of the normal harvest, and glyphosate's a known carcinogen. We know it causes cancer. We've known it for a very long time. Glyphosate's also a natural chelating agent, meaning it binds to metals. So it prevents people from absorbing selenium and calcium. So imagine, let's take this down a little side effort here. Maybe you're not reacting to glyphosate, but maybe the glyphosate is preventing you from absorbing calcium and selenium. Well, calcium and selenium deficiency can cause physical pain. Calcium deficiency causes muscle spasms, muscle cramps, and muscle pain. Selenium deficiency can cause your thyroid to plummet. And that can lead again to secondary pain. So these are I'm just trying to give your audience some examples of how this might affect different people in different ways, because it's not a one size fits all type of scenario. So you've got glyphosate that's being double sprayed. Your corn is sprayed with glyphosate, your wheat sprayed with glyphosate. Most of your sugarcane crops are sprayed, although sugarcane's not technically a grain. Soy's not a grain, but it's sprayed with glyphosate. So your barley, your wheat, your rye, your oats, your sorghum, your millet, your teff, your triticale, your different strains of grains are all sprayed now because that's just a general farming practice. And so glyphosate's one of the things that can contribute to poisoning of the GI tract, a damaging of the microbiome that leads to malabsorption syndromes and other pain points. So that's one aspect. Then you have other aspects. Okay, how is that grain stored? When that grain is harvested, it's stored in these big bins or silos. You probably, if you've driven through the countryside, you've seen these big, metal, circular, cylindrical objects sticking out in the air, right, with ridges in them. Those are grain silos. And so they store them in there. And as they store them in there, a lot of times they're being doused with more chemicals, pesticides to prevent bugs from infesting the crop, and fungicides to try to prevent mold growth are sprayed. So you're getting, fungicides, you're getting pesticides, you're getting glyphosate on the crop. And again, these things can be very damaging to humans when you start adding all these things up. But the grain is also dried out. And typically, even though it's sprayed with fungicide, it's a very common problem in farming today for grains to be contaminated with mold. And about 5% of the US population is allergic to mold. So when they eat grain that's contaminated with mold, they have allergic reactions that can create problems for them and mimic allergens. As far as some people say, well, I have seasonal allergies. And I say, well, when are your seasonal allergies? Well, summer, fall, spring, winter. That's not seasonal. That's allergies all the time, right? So if you're a kind of person that suffers from all the time allergies, you need to start considering your food and the potential that, some of the food that you're growing or that you're eating, especially grains, could be mold contaminated. You might be allergic to that mold. Mold also produces a mold toxin. There's something called a mycotoxin. And with grains, it's very common to have aflatoxin and ochratoxin and gliotoxin. These are, again, different forms of mold toxins that are known carcinogens. They are known to suppress the immune system. And so they can create, immunosuppression in people who get consistent or overdose exposure to them. What we've seen in the gluten-free food aisle, like a lot of your rice that's grown, a lot of your corn, they're contaminated with a lot of mycotoxins. This is one of the big problems. And so we're seeing immunosuppression in people that gravitate toward that processed gluten-free food aisle with all these grain-based products because they're being exposed to more mycotoxins and they're not really fully recovering with their disease because they're getting exposure to these other things that are also found in grain. We also have one of the problems with grain is its ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid ratios in humans should be about 2 to 1, meaning you should, for every omega-6, you should get at least one omega-3. And some would argue that that ratio should be closer to 1 to 1. But in grains, the ratio is extremely skewed. You're talking 12 to 1 or higher in terms of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. And when you skew that ratio in humans, you actually create chronic inflammation. So having too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3 will actually cause your body to produce more inflammation over time. And inflammation, generally speaking, causes pain. So those are a handful of things. There's much more than that I wrote about in No Grain, No Pain. Actually, it's 300 plus pages of scientific evidence and documentation about how grains and the substrates and components and the way it's farmed, the way it's produced, the way it's grown, et cetera, and the additives that are put into it after processing have different aspects or components as to how they can help generate problems in a person's health.
So one thing that is coming to mind that I'm anticipating a lot of people might be wondering is about organic, right? So obviously a few of the things that you've talked about could potentially be skewed by that. So I'm right, omega-3s or omega-6 to omega-3, that's not really part of this, but like as far as just the glyphosates and being sprayed, what about organic crops and what do you think about that? And I don't know really any more about like regulations in organic world right now and how that's being handled, but like, can people be eating grain minus the whole omega-6, omega-3 thing if they're eating organic, or what are your thoughts on that?
If they're not gluten sensitive. So now we come back and we bring in, what is gluten? Gluten is a family of proteins found in grain. It's a family of storage proteins. It's the job of glutens, and gluten is not a singular term. It's a plural term, but it's oftentimes used as a singular term. So we don't ever hear anybody say glutens. We hear everybody say gluten, right? As if it's one thing. Right. Well, we've identified hundreds of different forms of gluten. There's a gluten in corn that can cause inflammatory damage, even though corn is labeled gluten-free. There's a gluten in rice that can cause inflammatory damage, even though rice is labeled gluten-free by law. Same thing with oats. The gluten in oats is called avidin. The gluten in corn is called zein. The gluten in rice is called orzanin. And all three of these forms of gluten have been shown for many people with gluten issues to create inflammatory problems, even though they're being labeled gluten-free. So it goes back to, is a person gluten sensitive? That becomes a very important question to ask, because if a person's gluten sensitive, it doesn't matter whether the grain is organic. It doesn't matter, because organic has nothing to do with gluten sensitivity. Now, that being said, does organic affect the omega-6, omega-3 ratio? No, you're right, it does not. Does it affect the potential for glyphosate? Absolutely, it does. So that would be a bonus or benefit of using organic grain. But if you were still a gluten sensitive individual, even eating organic grain, you would still be getting gluten exposure and still be creating and setting up the potential for autoimmune disease development over time. Now, a couple of other factors about grain, regardless of their organic status, you have to understand is grain that's organic still harbors mold. It still harbors mycotoxins. If we're talking about organic rice, rice harbors cadmium and lead and arsenic. Most of the soil, the way the soil is today, it's contaminated with some of these heavier metals, and rice is notorious for pulling these, even organic rice. So if you eat rice as a major staple food, like one of the aspects of buying organic rice is you could still get contamination of lead, cadmium, and arsenic at levels that are high enough to create physiological inflammation internally, chemically, that could lead to or contribute to different diseases. So it's not just, okay, organic is good because you're eliminating pesticides, but what you're not eliminating is you're not eliminating the omega-6, omega-3 ratio. You're not eliminating the potential for mold and mycotoxin contamination. You're not omitting the fact that many of these grains post-harvest, maybe they didn't use pesticide, but they add additives
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the additives that are added to grain, one of them is bromine. Bromine is a halogen or a halide that when you get exposure to bromine, it actually causes iodine deficiency, which causes low thyroid function.
Got it.
Okay. Bromine also interferes with iodine uptake by the breast tissue. So females with breast tenderness oftentimes have iodine deficiency, and that's the reason they have that. And if they're eating a lot of grain, even if it's organic, but it's brominated flour, then there's that potential for them to have that iodine deficiency develop as a result of the consumption of that product. Then you also have then the synthetics that are added. Like, for example, the perfect example here would be like folic acid is added to grain, even organic grain. It's by law, it has to be. The U.S. government in the United States, there's fortification laws. And in 1943, see, people don't realize this about the history of grain. In 1943, grain was responsible for about 7,500 deaths a year. Wow. And the reason why it was responsible for that many deaths is because it was causing diseases like beriberi and pellagra. These are vitamin B1 and vitamin B3 deficiencies that if they go long enough, they can kill you. And so what happened in 1943 was this really smart scientist discovered that this is what was happening. And so as science got behind this, the government passed some laws that if you were going to sell any form of processed grain at all, it had to be fortified. Mm-hmm. And so the fortification laws were born. And so they started fortifying grain with vitamin B1, vitamin B3. Later in the 80s, I think it was the 80s, they added folic acid. But originally it was niacin, it was thiamine, it was iron, and iron is very oxidative and should not be fortified into anyone's food. It's another terrible idea. So what happens is now you're getting these synthetic fortification vitamins, which are arguably not very great for people, in a product that is known to kill you unless you fortify it with synthetic vitamins. So that you go back to the original question, which is if a product is killing this many people a year, how healthy could it actually be? And that we have to add synthetic vitamins so that it won't kill you. Like, is that something that makes a whole lot of sense? Now, I know that, one of the things here is that we can't allow the world to starve. We can't allow people to starve. And that grain is a very big, huge crop. There's a lot of money revolved around it because we export a lot of grain to third world countries that don't have, the land mass like we do to produce the quantity to feed their populations. But, you're trading starvation for chronic illness. Mm-hmm. And I know that I would rather have some food than not have some food. I'd rather have food and not starve to death. And even if that food potentiated some chronic inflammation, I'd still rather not starve to death. Right. But we now live in a world where we know that. Yeah. Now we have the ability to make a different decision, and we have the ability to make a different choice. But when it comes to cereal grain, understand that cereal grain, especially processed cereal grain, is very low in nutrient quantity. So it's very low in B vitamins, and that's why we have fortification laws. But if we go back in time, a lot of people think historically that grain is like the staple food that everyone has always been eating forever. And that's just not true. Did you know cereal was an invention rather, that only came around in the late 1800s. It was around 1895 when cereal was invented. Mm. Before that, there was really no such thing as cereal. So like people that grow up, you and I grew up with Tony the Tiger, mm-hmm. right? We grew up with, the little, the rabbit with the tricks and all that kind of stuff, right?
Lucky Charms.
Indoctrination of marketers, like throwing cartoon characters at us to create a fond bond, mm-hmm. right? Around, hey, the cereal is what we should have. And what did they say in all these commercials? And you probably know this phraseology. It goes something like this. Part of your balanced breakfast, right? Part of your balanced breakfast. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just marketing. Balanced breakfast means if I don't get the cereal, then my breakfast is somehow not balanced. Right? So it was marketers that really kind of created this paradigm shift of thought in our culture that said that cereal was super important. But prior 1895, cereal didn't exist. Post invented cereal. Post invented grape nuts. And then we had Kellogg. Kellogg, people don't realize that Kellogg, Dr. Kellogg, he was a doctor. He was a GI doc. Invented cornflakes, not because it was a health food. He invented it to create irritation of the gastrointestinal lining to help people with constipation poop. Oh. And his brother was a really good marketer, and this is where Kellogg's start came from. So they created this cornflake, right? This highly processed cornflake, which was a big part of the problem. And in 1943, I actually have the commercial ad when the law changed. I have this commercial ad from 1943 that says, "Now fortified with niacin and thiamine, so it's even healthier for you." They didn't say now fortified with niacin and thiamine so you won't die. What they said is now fortified with these vitamins so it's even better for you. So it kind of plays on words, mm-hmm. But marketing played a role in this. But people don't know that history about grain.
Right.
They think about, they read in the Bible, the staff of life and all that. And for people who are like, well, what about, taking the body of Christ, right? What about, taking communion? I'm not a biblical scholar. I am a pastor, but I'm not a biblical scholar. So I don't claim to be an expert in all things biblical. But I do know that in Genesis, when God cast Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, and I'm paraphrasing here, but one of the things he said is, you will toil in the fields as part of your punishment. So what did that mean? I don't know that anybody really truly knows what it means, but does it mean that, there were no grains in the Garden of Eden? Like, there's no mention of grain in the Garden of Eden. So as part of the punishment, that we're destined to eat a food as a staple that actually slowly kills us over time. I don't know. That's wild speculation. I'm not making that claim, but it does intrigue me, and it does provoke a lot of thought in me, because, I'm Catholic, and so, but I do not take the host. I do not take the host because I'm gluten sensitive. And so even these low gluten wafers in these what they're calling gluten-free aren't really gluten-free. And I look, in my experience, I've been in practice 20 years, and I see people day in and day out, they go try to take communion and they get sick, and they're in bed for a week, or they're down and in bed for a month. Sometimes they have such a severe sensitivity to gluten, they get hospitalized. It's not worth it. And the premise of taking communion, and I know I'm deviating really hard here, but the premise of taking communion, in my opinion, is that, we're taking the body of Christ. We're saying we're going to take on the body of Christ so that we can act in our bodies more like Christ, right? And do better things in the world. But nowhere in the Bible does it say that we have to take communion. There's nothing in the Bible about having to do communion. So for those of you who are really religious and kind of battling with this gluten thing and whether or not you should do it, look, if it makes you sick, don't do it. God understands. If anybody understands God, God understands that you should honor your body as a temple and obviously not take something into it that's detrimental. Right. And so anyway, I'm going to get off that horse and hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, like I would love it if I'm anticipating that a lot of people are like, well, what in the world do I eat, right? If grain has been such a staple of so many people's diets and they've grown up with it, whether gluten-free or not gluten-free, like what's your plan for people? And I think you have like a 30-day plan maybe in your book. So can you kind of give us a little overview or outline of what people should be eating in the world of no grain?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really harder because most people already don't have a diverse diet. They think they have a diverse diet, but their diet is really just, a conglomeration of grain shaped and formed in different ways. Right. So I eat grain of some sort as cereal for breakfast, or toast, or a bagel, or a wrap, right? It's all grain. Then at lunch, I eat some kind of sandwich. Maybe it's a Subway or, some type of, breaded product. And then at dinner, some kind of pasta, or we order pizza, right? And so the whole base of that is grain. And so they look at these different foods as if they're a huge degree of variety, when in fact, it's just grain disguised in many different forms. So really, I would argue that those of you who are saying, what could I eat? You're eating the same thing, basically, just in different forms right now. So the challenge with going grain-free is in learning what other foods are available. There are 400 or 500 different varieties of fruits, vegetables, and meats that can be consumed that are not grains. It's just that your world hasn't been introduced to a lot of these. And so sometimes just opening up your world to them. For example, as a carbohydrate starch, if you wanted to add into your diet, there are 5 different varieties of sweet potato, and they do not taste the same. They're not all yams. They're not all the stringy yams that you didn't like growing up at Thanksgiving when you had the yam sweet potato pie. I mean, there's Japanese sweet potato. There's henna sweet potato. They have a nice nutty texture. They have a similar texture as like a white potato. And they're very good, and they taste well. Instead of eating spaghetti, you could do something like spaghetti squash, or there are other types of noodles like kelp noodles, for example. I mean, it's just a matter of exploring what your different options are. And in today's world with the internet at our fingertips, it's actually quite easy. When I first started, testing people for gluten sensitivity genetically 20 years ago, there was no such thing as a gluten-free grocery aisle. It didn't exist. It was not a household word. And so it wasn't until maybe probably the last decade where gluten has really taken on, its name and face as a mainstay in the dietary realm for people. So today it's so much easier than it was 15 or 20 years ago. But my book as an overview, it's meat, it's vegetables, it's nuts, it's fruit, if we're just making it really simple. But then you just dive into different varieties of those options, because how many different kinds of meat can you eat? You know, there's turkey, there's chicken, there's beef, there's fish. How many different kinds of fish are there? There's lots. There's wild game. If you hunt, there's elk, there's, you know, wild boar. There's all kinds of different things that can be consumed in that regard. And then you have fruits and vegetables. And of course, the varieties there, hundreds and hundreds of varieties of different things. My advice for most people is try to pick what's in season because it tastes better. It tastes good when you eat it in season. It doesn't taste as good if you eat it out of season. So seasonal availability of fresh fruits and vegetables, those are real food. That's what you eat. You eat real food. You don't eat processed food. This is where most people get stuck because eating real food is not convenient. And sometimes the saying goes, a person's pain has to be greater than their convenience, than their desire for convenience.
Right.
And if it's not, then they're probably not going to make the changes that I spell out in No Grain, No Pain if it's not greater. But if their pain is greater and they're really ready to make a change and embrace diet change, then it works beautifully. It works brilliantly. So it's not that hard. It's just a matter of doing your diligence. In the book, I have 31 recipes that my wife created. There's our own home family recipes done from scratch. They're fantastic. And if I can say so myself, although taste is relative, right? But we try to get people started with those 31 recipes in a 7-day meal plan to kind of simplify their ease into the diet. But it's broken down into 2 phases. Phase 1 is a little easier to start. It's not quite as restrictive. And then phase 2 is where we really pull in more of the restrictions and really get them fully grain-free, among some other things that we have them eliminate that are common foods that can contribute to inflammation that people are just not very aware of.
What about like foods that it's my understanding that like quinoa and millet are like seeds? Is that true? Are they considered grain in your opinion?
Millet is a grain.
Okay.
It is a grain. And quinoa is not. Quinoa is a seed. So let's define what a grain is. Grains are the seeds of grass.
Got it.
Okay. So, if you ever walk in a field and you see all the grass sprouting up, at the certain times of the year, you'll see little seed heads form, right? That's grain. Okay. Mm-hmm. There are other seeds, certainly. There's peach seeds, there's peach pits, right? Cherry pits, apple seeds. There's lots of seeds. Most, fruits bear seeds, and that's, how they perpetuate their own species. That's the whole magic of a seed, is it's not designed to be your staple food. It's designed to perpetuate its own species, but it's also designed to protect its species from extinction. So a lot of people don't realize this, and this is basic biology. I had a great biology teacher when I was growing up, and they really kind of taught this. And this is part of why I think the way that I do is that I was taught that, look, a seed has poison in it. Look at like a cherry pit and look at a peach pit. They have cyanide poison in them. Why? Because it's designed to deter animals from eating it. Mm-hmm. So if animals eat all the seeds, then there will be nothing left to grow, and the plant will go into extinction. Well, the seeds of grass aren't any different than that. But that's what we define as grains, are the seeds of grass. So gluten is the name of the family of proteins found within the seeds of grass, millet inclusive, okay, that is designed to feed the germ, the DNA germ of that grain so that it can grow and sprout. Those glutens are also designed to biochemically protect that germ from being eaten by predators. In essence, all glutens are irritants. Okay, so it really boils down to how much your body can tolerate. Everybody, to a certain extent, has a limit, if that makes sense. Yeah. But people with gluten sensitivity the limit is 20 parts per million, a breadcrumb. But people without gluten sensitivity, everybody has a unique limit, and that's different for different people. So you can overdo it even if you're not gluten sensitive, because if you eat enough of a seed, any seed, including grains, you're going to eat enough of the poisons in that seed that are designed to suppress your own digestion. For example, there's a protein in wheat that's not gluten at all. It's called ATI, amylase trypsin inhibitor. So we were talking about grain earlier, and what are some of the other things in grains? Well, this is one of the other things. This family of proteins called amylase trypsin inhibitors, what they do is they irritate the gut lining by activating part of your innate immune system. So they dock on a receptor called a toll-like receptor in the GI tract, and they inflame it and they activate it to create an inflammatory cascade that hopefully deters you from wanting to eat that in the future. Okay, in essence, they create pain to warn you away from eating them. The other thing they do is they send a chemical message to your pancreas to prevent it from releasing digestive enzymes. So now you eat that food and you can't digest it, and so it comes out in your poop, and so now you got seeds in your poop that have fertilizer, and they're on the ground, and now they can grow. So think of these grains as being intelligent beings, in a sense, they're not animated. They can't run away. They can't punch you for trying to eat them. So they've developed chemical defense systems to protect and preserve their own species. So all grains are the seeds of grass. Now, not all seeds are grains, but all seeds of grass contain glutens, okay, that for somebody with gluten sensitivity issue, they would want to be aware of. Now, you mentioned quinoa.
Yeah.
Quinoa is not a grain. It's what's known as a pseudo grain. There's 3 pseudo grains. There's quinoa, there's amaranth, and there's buckwheat.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not grains. They're not part of that plant family, but they are seeds. And what research shows with quinoa is that a couple of the different proteins found in cultivars of quinoa are so close in structure and shape to gluten that they cause a gluten-like reaction in somebody with gluten sensitivity.
Got it.
Okay. And then with amaranth, it's similar. And then with buckwheat, it's also similar, but also with amaranth and buckwheat, these, because they're used frequently as gluten-free substitutes, technically they are gluten-free, but they're oftentimes cross-contaminated because of processing. They end up being cross-contaminated with gluten, like wheat or other plant-based grains that definitely do have gluten in them. And so some people will react to amaranth or buckwheat, not because of the gluten per se, but because of the cross-contamination of gluten in them. So one of the things I recommend people do in No Grain, No Pain is cut out pseudo grains, and let's make sure that we're not getting any risk or potential for that cross-contamination, so that we can ensure that what we're doing is the right move to heal the gut and heal the lining of the GI tract and prevent the problem.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that, because that's definitely something I hear a lot of in the gluten-free world, that certain, those particular things would be okay. And I don't want to, confuse anybody who's in that world, as far as like how you're talking about no grain, no pain. So can you just share like any other natural remedies for helping people, decrease their pain, decrease their inflammation in their body, no matter what kind of chronic pain they have? Any other suggestions there?
Yeah, one of the most powerful kind of 1-2 punches that can be used, often overlooked, in my opinion, pound for pound, best 2 things you can do for chronic inflammation is mixing vitamin C, but you got to get the doses right. The dose has got to be high enough. Like, the typical tabs you buy over the counter, 250 to 500 milligrams. It's kind of like spitting on a forest fire. You're not going to make much of a dent. You really, to be effective with vitamin C in pain, you've got to be at 5+ grams for an adult. So we're talking about like average 150 pound adult, 5+ grams a day. And in some cases even higher, 10 grams. And you mix that with quercetin. Quercetin is a type of bioflavonoid. And when you combine quercetin and vitamin C, the anti-inflammatory kind of combining power, synergism between the two, I've seen it be as effective as a steroid. And so, so steroids are heavy hitters for pain reduction, right? Doctors use it in steroid injections, corticosteroid, like, Medrol dose pack, to get people's pain under control really quick. But mixing 5 grams of vitamin C with 6 grams of quercetin is very effective for a lot of people. Now, it's not 100% hit for everybody in the world, but it's a very, very effective natural. You're looking to do something natural that doesn't rip a hole in your gut, because most of your pain medications like ibuprofen and aspirin, they'll tear a hole in your gut lining and create gastric bleeding, but they'll also cause leaky gut. And if you add a steroid to that, then the effects are 10-fold greater. They'll rip a bigger hole in your gut. They'll cause ulcers even more. So if you find yourself stuck in that rut of needing a steroid or being on chronic steroids for chronic pain, and combining that with daily use of something like ibuprofen, you're going to find yourself in big trouble, because that combination can cause ulceration in not only the stomach, but the intestine, causing occult blood loss. So you start bleeding inside, and then you develop iron deficiency anemia, and then you get tired. And when you don't get enough oxygen, because you can't carry oxygen because your red blood cells don't have enough iron to generate hemoglobin, then everything hurts. So then you develop a new kind of pain. And this is kind of what I try to steer people away from, is I call it the prescription pain trap. It's where, look, it's never a good idea to mask your pain, because your pain is a warning symptom that your body needs you to change. Okay. So, if you're thinking about masking your pain, and that goes even with vitamin C and quercetin, like, I don't want people to take those 2 things forever to mask their pain. I want them to get out of acute pain, but then I want them to ask the bigger question. Why was I in the pain in the first place? Where did the inflammation come from? What was the progenesis of what was creating that disruption? Like, for some people, they sprain or strain a muscle, and that, or a tendon or a ligament, right? And so that'll heal with time. And you can use something like vitamin C and quercetin to combat that pain. But the person that's like, I don't know why the shoulder hurts. I didn't do anything to it. I don't know why my knees hurt. I can't walk a mile without just they're swelling, like that kind of thing. There's a reason. And I would encourage anyone with those types of pain scenarios to explore what those reasons are, even beyond what I'm talking about here. But those are two really great natural pain relievers. If you want to add another one that's really effective, you can add high doses of turmeric. And the same thing with turmeric. You've got to get upwards of 2 to 3 grams or more of turmeric, and that concentrated turmeric, not like turmeric root, not 2 grams of turmeric root, although you can use turmeric root naturally in your food, and it does work as a natural anti-inflammatory. But if you're talking about like therapeutic levels, you really want to get it upwards of 2 to 3 grams plus, and it needs to be standardized to contain 90 to 95% curcuminoid, which is the active anti-inflammatory botanical in turmeric that is effective at pain reduction.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. So what about exercise real quick? So for people watching right now who do have chronic pain, and it's probably potentially difficult for them to be doing exercise, and or they might have extra weight, what do you suggest for people in that scenario?
So we always have to start where we're at. And that the fear that a lot of people in chronic pain have is that they're scared to start, or they don't have somebody to guide them to start them where they're at. It's very important to start where you're at. Like we all have that history. Oh, back in high school, I did this and I did that, and I could, go out and do that till 2 a.m. and still wake up and still exercise, right? But you get to a point in your life where your body's maybe broken down. You can't go there and start there. You have to start where you're at. So what does that look like? For some people who are really overweight, it might be gravity assisted types of activities. So getting in a swimming pool, right? And just getting basic movement without the force of gravity kind of bearing down on the joints, creating a lot of problems. So swimming might be a good option. Water weights might be a good option. Water therapies might be a good option for that individual. There's another technology that can be used. It's vibration therapy. If you're familiar with vibration platforms, these are great technologies that are zero gravity. They're not zero gravity. I mean, you're in gravity, but you're not doing jarring exercises on them, but you're getting in certain positions and doing certain stretches where that vibrational hertz, that frequency, can stimulate some muscle growth when you are in a bad place. So it's a great place to start. It's not where you finish, but it's a good place to start if you're struggling with a chronic pain issue. A couple of other things and this is my experience, is that with chronic pain, if you can find out what's creating the genesis of the inflammation, and for most, it's diet. So it's something they're eating, whether that's gluten or grain or whether it's something else. As a standard of care, anyone who walks through my doors in my clinic, we test them for food and chemical reactivity. Because if they're applying, let's say their shampoo and they're allergic to it, or body lotion, and they're rubbing that all over their knee every day, right? And they're allergic to the active ingredient. I had one woman using cannabinoid oil, CBD, and she was allergic to one of the inactive ingredients in the oil, and it wasn't helping her. It was making her worse, right? So, but if we hadn't tested her for that, we would never have known that. And so, you can be allergic to the chemicals that you rub on your body or put in your body. You can be allergic to the foods that you put in your body, and that can be a very great source for chronic inflammation. And if your audience walks away with anything today, understand that food matters. Like what you eat is unique. One man's food is another man's poison. So if you're struggling with a chronic pain and you're trying to figure out how to get exercise done, and you're battling with that, I can't get past a certain point because the pain just keeps flaring on me, you really should work with a functional medicine practitioner and have some testing done that helps you to isolate and identify what you could be doing food-wise or chemical-wise that might be inciting that pain or preventing that pain from healing or curing. But in addition, you should also have your nutritional status checked, because some people, they're in chronic pain because of something like a zinc deficiency. If you don't have adequate zinc, you can't reform cartilage. So if you damage your cartilage and you're trying to rehab it, but you're zinc deficient, it's a no-go. You're not going to win, no matter how much exercise you try to do, even in a pool. Same thing with like a vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D deficiency causes severe muscle pain. So you'll never overcome it if you have a biochemical problem that's inhibiting you from overcoming it, even with a reduced exercise regimen at your level of tolerance. So it kind of becomes, think of it like two pillars that really should be investigated for anybody with chronic pain. One should be the pillar of biochemistry. What's your nutritional status? What foods are you eating that could be hurting you versus what foods you should be eating that might be helping you, right? And then the other prong to that is the activity, the exercise, and the motion. Like, where are you at what can you begin to do that can start to stimulate healing and repairing without recreating an injury for you? And having somebody who's versed in both those areas to guide you, sometimes if you're stuck, is a really good idea.
Got it. I think I have like 1,000 more questions. This is fascinating. There's so many places to go with this. I appreciate you talking with us about this. And I want to make sure you get a chance to talk about your gift. So you have an autoimmune gift, I think, for people. So everybody, there's a button below that links over to Peter's site. So could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So those of you that are struggling right now, and you may have an autoimmune disease and you may not know it. And that's part of why I wanted to use this as a gift, because a lot of people don't realize that Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease, and rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis and eczema and asthma. Okay. And there are a number of diseases like multiple sclerosis, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and myotrophic lateral sclerosis. There are conditions that can affect the adrenal gland like Addison's disease. There are autoimmune joint problems like reactive arthritis or inflammatory arthritis. Like, these are all forms of autoimmune disease. But what happens is, generally when you get a diagnosis, your doctor doesn't tell you that it's autoimmune. They forget that part. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, guess what? It's autoimmune disease. Alzheimer's, guess what? It's autoimmune disease. So these really common diseases, osteoporosis, autoimmune disease, that are pain points for people, because what happens, they get a diagnosis and they get put on medication. And nobody's telling them it's autoimmune. And so the gift I have for your audience today is it's a very extensive, it's about 68 pages. It's an ebook, but it also comes with a video. And the video is about 2 hours long. So I dive into the different triggers for autoimmune disease in depth, including what lab test to ask your doctor for. So it's a really valuable gift. Part of my mission, the audience doesn't know, that my mission is to save 100 million lives. In the US alone, there's 46 million people with autoimmune disease. And the average person with autoimmune disease will not find a doctor like me. They will find a traditional doctor, and they will go down the road of medications and never know that they can be empowered. If they had the knowledge in this ebook and in this video series to just apply it, they could be empowered to overcome their autoimmune condition. So that's part of my mission, to save 100 million lives. So anyway, all that being said, that's what this gift focuses on, is it teaches you what the triggers to autoimmune disease are, and how to identify them, and what lab test to ask your doctor for, and what you can do to start making those changes that are going to have meaningful impact on your condition today.
Awesome. Thank you. That sounds amazing. And everyone, I highly recommend you click the button below and go grab that gift if you have an autoimmune disease, or even if you don't, and learn about it. Learn about what you might have, because you never know what's going on. So I appreciate that. Are there any last insights? I feel like we've covered so many different things, and yet there's so much more to talk about. Any last things you want to share before we wrap up?
I think more than anything, just know, if you're watching this and you're struggling with anything, that there's 7 things you should be thinking about on a daily basis if you're not already. Okay. Number 1, you should be thinking about food, because it matters. And we've talked a little bit about that today, so I'll let that speak for itself. Number 2, you should be thinking about sleep, and you should be doing it more. Most people neglect this part of their health, but sleep should be done. It should be a priority. You should be asleep between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. as a minimum. And that doesn't mean sleep 4 hours a day and start your day, but 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. is a magic healing time. It's when your hormones re-regulate, your circadian rhythm resets. And if you're going to bed at midnight every night, you're missing 50% of that window, and you're not going to heal. So sleep is very critical. You should be thinking about it more. Number 3, exercise. Exercise is very critical for many, many reasons that we just don't have time to get into the length and depth of the importance of exercise, but you should be doing it, and you should be doing it to your level of tolerance every day. And it should be a part of your daily thoughts and routine. Okay. Number 4, clean air. If you don't filter your air, filter it. We live in a very toxic environment because of the conveniences that we have. You have the convenience of a car. You have the convenience of getting on a plane, but that comes at a cost. So protect yourself by filtering the air in your home. I recommend ultrafine HEPA filtration. Additionally, when we're thinking about filters, let's think about water filters too. I noticed you were drinking out of a metal bottle, not a plastic bottle.
Yep.
A+ to that, right? So filtering the water becomes very important if you live in a municipality where the water had chlorine or chloramines being added. There's a lot of, in Houston where I live, there's 42 prescription medications that have been identified in our drinking water. And that's after the city filters it. So imagine 42 drugs in your body that you didn't ask for. And so if you live in a major city, know that you're probably looking at something very similar, because people pour out old drugs down the toilet, people pee out unmetabolized drugs, and it ends up in your water supply. So filter your water. Just take care of it. It's not super expensive. And it's a simple thing to do. Okay. I think we're at number 5. Number 6, sunshine. I know what your dermatologist has told you. He's told you to avoid the sun because of skin cancer, but realize that most skin cancers don't form on areas that get the most sun exposure. Most skin cancers form on areas that get the least sun exposure. And that sun does not cause skin cancer, sun burning does. And there's a very big difference. So telling you to avoid the sun is like saying don't drink water because somebody drowned it. Okay, so think of it like this. Get sunshine, get it on a daily basis. You know the limits of your skin better than anyone else. So get sunshine to tolerance on a daily basis. So if you can tolerate 20 minutes without burning, then do so, but do it regularly because sun produces anti-cancer chemicals. It regulates your circadian rhythm. It helps you produce anti-inflammatories. It helps you make vitamin D. It helps you make melatonin. It's so important. And people have been hiding indoors behind computers in dark rooms for too long. And it's time to come out and play in the sun again. And then the last thing, number 7, stress. And the best advice I can give you here, there's 2 prongs to this. Is number 1, look at your relationships. Are they worth it? And I don't mean like divorce your husband or wife. I don't mean like don't talk with your family, but mitigate the relationships that you have and mitigate your exposure to intense stress. And if that means spending less time at an aunt who you clash with every time you get together, then spend less time with her. Like preserve your body's integrity by not putting it in an environment where you're just going to be banging heads with somebody. And then the second prong of this is love what you do. A lot of people go to work, they go to school, they get a job, and then they go to work to a job they hate for a boss they don't like. And they work for, 30 or 40 years. The average American works, a better part of their life to try to accumulate wealth so that they can retire. And then once they retire, they've spent all those years accumulating their wealth. But in that process, they've destroyed their health. Right. And so now they have to spend all of their accumulated wealth on trying to figure out why they're sick. And so then they die, and it's a very tragic thing. So love what you do. And if you don't love what you do, if you're miserable in your job, look, I'm not saying go out and quit your job. If you've got responsibilities to take care of your family financially, that doesn't mean go quit your job today. But look, try to work toward the future, positioning yourself toward doing something you're passionate about that you can bring light and hope and love to the world in a really big and major way. And whether that means you're a great plumber and you love plumbing, or you're a doctor like me and you just love helping people, it doesn't matter. You can be great at anything. Just be great at something, but also be great at something you love to do and that you want to do. Mm-hmm. And so if you combine those 7 things, okay, you're going to be an unstoppable force. And that's what I want for you. I want health and wealth and happiness in your life. So combine those things. Think about those 7 things on a regular basis. If you think about them, you'll find that there will be small areas within those 7 categories that you may not be hitting the notes just right. And you'll find ways that you can improve yourself. So if you do, then just apply the improvements and watch the magic happen.
I love that. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Peter. I love the 7 things and it just wraps it all up together. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And thank you for putting this on. I appreciate your courage in bucking the system. I know it doesn't come without a cost of its own either.
Well, Ike and I are passionate about what we do too. So we love the life that we get to lead doing these kinds of things. So it's a huge honor. So thank you so much. And everyone who's watching or listening right now, thank you so much for showing up for yourself and tuning in, and we will see you again shortly. Bye-bye.